Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ali. First, I'd like to say thank you to the Madinah Institute for providing this opportunity to share our MindFit approach and show you how organisations stop and stunt their own success, and most of the time that's done without them knowing it. And also thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy it. While we'll be covering a lot of new ground, for those who want to understand more, I also have a gift at the end of this presentation that goes into far more detail and gives lots of real examples. So don't worry about having to take all this new stuff in. It may be very new to you and it may challenge you along the way. So let's begin. It's an established fact that when people are engaged in their work, they are more productive and generally happier. However, biannual surveys by Gallup show that only 13% of the global workforce are engaged. And while there are regional variations, this low percentage has been stubbornly fixed at and around 13% for many years. And a quick look at Gallup's 12 questions on engagement will show how most questions can be directly or indirectly related to leadership. So is leadership the real problem? In June 2009, in the Harvard Business Review, Jack Zenger and Joseph Folkman published their findings on the 10 fatal flaws that derail leaders. The list is on the screen, and they include a lack of energy and enthusiasm, lack of vision, lack of direction, resisting new ideas, and not learning from mistakes. Has anything really changed today? With all the knowledge we have on leadership, solving these problems should not be an issue, should it? And yet to date, it's not really happened. We seem to be either skirting over the surface of the problem or trying to unravel leadership in microscopic detail. So maybe it's time to do something different, to travel in a new direction. So on today's MindFit Journey, I'm going to take you on a new journey where I'll help you to discover the power of what we call the reality-driven leader. How to identify behavioural waste in your world and how this parasite blocks your personal progress and that of organisations. How to engage people to develop growth mindsets, what we at MindFit simply call can-do attitudes with little behavioural waste. And how leaders and entrepreneurs reduce their personal, cultural and systemic behavioural waste through personal focus and effort. Now that's quite a lot to get through, but remember I promised an offer for you at the end of this presentation that will cover absolutely everything with examples and ways you can start looking at your own world, your own organisation, with a reality-driven leader's eyes. So as Lao Tzu, the 5th century BC Chinese philosopher and writer, once said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So with your permission, let's start taking some of those steps. First, I think there's enough evidence now to make the statement that leaders are not born, they are made. Otherwise, why would you be on this course, on this conference call? But as we will come on to beliefs in this presentation, if you don't believe that, then it's fine, but it will limit your personal growth. Most of us love sayings, and this one also comes from Lao Tzu, as it has real meaning for me, and I hope it will have meaning for you. A leader is best when people barely know he exists, when his work is done, his aim fulfilled, and they will say, we did it ourselves. Now, it also demonstrates leadership can be a very lonely place, and many will say the same being an entrepreneur or a business owner. But it doesn't have to be that way. As this presentation unfolds, you'll see it's a choice, and we may make these choices consciously or more likely subconsciously. And this presentation is not intended to be an academic overview. We haven't got the time, but it is grounded in the world of organisation. It will suggest that our current drive to understand what leadership is and to ascertain all those leadership variables, which are seen by different researchers and practitioners as essential knowledge, has led us too far in the wrong direction. Now on this slide you'll see that we've amassed a large number of leadership styles over the years, but they're not all listed here, despite the slide being somewhat busy. Our overemphasis on academic research and knowledge-based learning may have caused some of the issues with leadership. The need to explore the minutiae of leadership has led to a myriad of leadership descriptions, traits, attributes, characteristics, and principles that's become a meaningless collection of words or ideas. Knowing about leadership through a mass of descriptive words is vastly different from either being a leader or doing leadership. Linking some of the words into different leadership styles is often done and yet not really helpful, as it generates a range of leadership behaviours that once again loses its meaning through its complexity, and it makes it virtually impossible to apply. The answer to good or even great leadership may lie not in seeking an understanding of those variables, but in something which sits at the very core of who we are and how we operate as a human being. If we can understand how all of us operate as people in a simple and intuitive way, then surely we can apply this core understanding not only to personal performance, but also to better leadership and organisational performance. So I suppose the question is, how do we operate? The result of years of research and practical applications that I'm going to share with you today is now on the screen. It's a simple map of how we operate. We call it the MindFit Map. Despite all our complexities and our differences, this map has only 3 directions. Each of those directions is where our attitude will take us. And that's a can't do attitude, a won't do attitude, or a can do attitude. And despite what we like to believe, many, in fact most people, haven't a can-do attitude. Now you might ask how I can say that with any sort of authority. Well, I've heard recently on these presentations that Gallup is quite commonly referred to. And Gallup's regular research shows that only 13% of the global workforce are engaged. And a very simple look at the map will show you that engagement, it comes from a can-do attitude, not from can't do and won't do. But we'll go into that a little later. The map's origins are quite important, as they come from years of research and testing by Graham Williams, who's affectionately known as the architect of MindFit. And the starting point of his research came from Professor Martin Seligman and the concept of learned helplessness. As you'll see, helpless is in the left-hand side, the can't-do attitude of the map. It's what we call can't-do attitudes. The map has further evolved over time to become what it is today, and our clients find it intuitive and common sense once they understand it. It can also be interpreted at a superficial level or at very deep levels that explain even the most complicated human behaviour. Now, Graham was part of the John Whitmore team of performance consultants in the 1990s, and MindFit was born simply out of the curiosity to understand why leadership development and performance coaching achieve mixed and often quite poor results. Today, we term people who operate from a can-do mindset as simply being MindFit. And we define mindfitness as choosing to perform to our optimum in different situations through can-do attitudes and behaviours. But put very simply, it's choosing to be the best we can be. The key to the MindFit Map is discovering where people consistently operate from, as that will dictate success or failure. Now let me ask you a question. which direction do you or your organisation automatically travel towards? But before you answer, remember, there's only 13% globally, according to Gallup, that are in the can-do zone. And the direction of travel is automatic. It's a habit we develop. And some of you may have seen this quote before. It's from Aristotle, and it's excellence is a habit. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but it's a habit. The question we can then start asking is, can we change bad habits, the can't do and won't do attitudes, into good habits, can do attitudes? The answer is yes, if people want to. But then, quite honestly, who wouldn't want to be a can-do person? Especially when they realise what the can't do and the won't do people actually achieve. Here at MindFit, we create can-do people all the time, and it's a lot quicker than people think. So now let's take the next step. Our quirky mind. We call it a quirky mind because we're all different. To give our lives stability, we seek and operate in a world of patterns. Patterns that support our beliefs. Those beliefs become our truth or reality, and they also give us meaning. And importantly, they enable order, predictability, and control to be designed into our world. I'm sure if you think a little, you'll have patterns where you operate on a daily basis. Now, what if those patterns or our beliefs are flawed? What if our perception is different from reality? What if the patterns we work within are just not right? What if we believe the machinery can produce 1,000 units per hour, but in reality it can only produce 500? Or what about people that are at their desk, so the assumption is they must be busy? So let's look at what different attitudes will take us to when we believe our patterns start to change. As the slide shows, there's a huge difference. A powerful person will change their mind if the facts change, and they will act accordingly. A defensive person, that's a won't do person on the map, will stick to their beliefs despite the facts, and they will block or make excuses, and they will do this consistently. Whether they know they're doing it or they don't know they're doing it, they will do it. And a helpless person, or a can't do, in simple terms, will ignore anything different. They'll choose not to understand it, and they will take actions to avoid. Do we take any notice of what's really happening and act accordingly, or ignore it? If we ignore it or dismiss it, we could already be rooted in the can't do and won't do attitudes, the area of what we call behavioural waste. If you're there, personal organisation and performance is seriously at risk. As I'll show you shortly, the results may be seen on KPIs and performance results, but the cause is rooted in behaviour. The habitual attitudes that people continue, either consciously or subconsciously. As an example of the power of the map, I've compared it to Gallup, and you'll see the area at the bottom of the map is the area we call behavioural waste, those can't do and won't do attitudes that stop can do people achieving. That's the fundamental part of this. And as mentioned earlier, we can recycle the bad behaviours into good behaviours and create more can do people individually or as a team or for the organisation. So I think we need to now look at what behavioural waste is, and I need to define it. Behavioural waste involves forms of behaviour that can be usefully removed or reduced, which prevent us from achieving our purpose and which reduce our effectiveness or the effectiveness of other people. We'll cover some examples of behavioural waste in a business context shortly. But consider for the moment consider for the moment where leadership development has traditionally been focused on learning, a knowledge transfer operation that may have had experiential learning. What if those leaders can't do leaders? Not can do leaders, but can't do leaders, or won't do leaders? What if they have large elements of behavioural waste? Will they learn anything new, or just block it and ignore it? Doesn't it make sense to eliminate the waste first? In fact, recent research in 2014 from Rowe and Sutton suggests that that is the case. It's necessary to remove destructive and negative attitudes and behaviours. The process to becoming MindFit starts with removing behavioural waste. Can't do and won't do attitudes. And whilst we'd like to think we don't have any, our process soon breaks that myth. Remember, the patterns and beliefs create behavioural waste, and there are 3 types of behavioural waste we need to reduce. And as shown on the slide, the 3 are personal, cultural, and systemic. Examples of that shortly. The costs, however, will manifest themselves in insignificant time, effort, and money that's wasted, and it impacts negatively on performance and productivity. And remember, as I've already said, it's necessary to remove destructive and negative attitudes and behaviours. But what's the cost of behavioural waste? This slide shows some evidence of what our clients say about the 3 types of behavioural waste that they've reduced or eliminated. These are underlying and unchecked habits that individuals or teams identified and changed. Let's look at personal. Reduced excessive gossip and moaning. One of the biggest complaints in organisations is that people gossip and moan. Gossip becomes fact, fact gets acted upon, and then typically it disproves the gossip. People stop prevaricating. They stop saying no to other people, and they sought ways to help them rather than just block them. And they also stopped what's becoming quite common now in a term of game passing. So they actually got on with the job. Culturally, or in a team environment or organisational environment, meetings are one of the biggest problems that businesses suffer from. People turning up late for meetings. There's no clear agenda. There are no clear outcomes. So why go to the meeting anyway? What was the reason for the meeting? Why would it add value? We always have it at 9 o'clock on a Friday. Why? People need to ask those questions. MindFit people ask those questions. They also ensured emails were clear and easy to understand. And as we all know, the email is not written for the person sending it, it's actually written for the person receiving it. One of the biggest problems in businesses, even today, is the fact that communication is quite poor. Perhaps even looking at emails, communication might improve. And lastly, systemic. Reducing the analysis of activities because they weren't needed. Identify pinch points in the process and reduce the impact. Removed unnecessary activities in process aimed at handling complaints. Change manufacturing process so that it flowed from one activity to the next. Now you'll notice that there's a bit of a common theme here. These aren't very, very complicated issues, perhaps. They're quite simple. But if they're left to continue, the damage to the organisation or the person can be quite considerable. So once you start to reduce behavioural waste, you can then develop what we call reality-driven leaders. So what is a reality-driven leader? Well, context is king to any leader. And as we know all too well, that one leadership style will not work every time. I'm assuming we do know that, don't we? Well, a reality-driven leader knows it. And what makes them different is that they operate in a context and they adjust the leadership style depending on the set of circumstances or facts that surround a particular event or a situation and the people involved in that event or situation. They've the ability to constantly adjust their style to meet the challenges that they face in real time. They're also constantly reality checking at the intersection across two dimensions within organisations where convergence occurs. And I'll show these two dimensions shortly, but they are the purpose systems which all businesses tend to have, and the behavioural personal meaning dimension, which most businesses don't have. Reality-driven leaders focus on doing leadership, not knowing about leadership, and if they need a different approach, they go and look for it, they research it, and what they do is they go and practice it. So let's have a quick look at these two dimensions. The traditional model of a business is a combination of people, systems, and processes at its basic form. Every business will have this first dimension. We call it the purpose systems dimension. And that operates with people applying systems and processes for desired outcomes. That's a vision, a mission, goals, objectives, keeping shareholders happy, etc., etc. Whilst people are employed, even though they may be in training or support, mentoring or coaching, the reality is that people dimension is just assumed to work. Again, evidence says this. Recall Gallup's 13% again. The reality of engagement and those soft issues that we call the behavioural personal meaning dimension has not been specifically or directly improved and may for many not even be addressed because it's proven far too difficult. Some might call this the elephant in the room. Other people may call it the politics of the organisation. There are many other terms you may relate to, and perhaps this might just prompt you into thinking about what happens in your world. The reality-driven leader, however, will be different, and they operate at this intersection. We simply call it the convergent point. They ensure the operation is doing the right thing and doing things right. As Warren Bennis, among others, have said, managers do things right, leaders do the right thing. We need management to make sure both are happening, hence reality-driven leaders. If the right thing is to change procedures, policy or process, then reality-driven leaders will make it happen. So let's look at what that means in a business diagram. I've mentioned the traditional business model operates predominantly in one dimension. It's shown here on the right-hand side. Put simply, we have people, employees, management, operating, stabilizing new linear systems and processes to fulfill the business objective. Everybody does it, everybody knows it, it can be quite complex, but fundamentally that's what people are employed to do. Organisations that engage the hearts and minds operation, however, have the second dimension, and that's shown by the left-hand side. We'll simply refer to that as behaviours. However, this for some organisations will work only to effect, but for the vast majority of organisations, they'll either not recognise it or have little success in managing it. And that's evidenced by what, you may ask? Well, we're back to Gallup's 13% again. The lack of engagement across the global workforce is huge. These behaviours on the left-hand side, or collectively you may know it as culture, deliver and add value to the organisation. It's where behavioural waste needs to be reduced to improve performance. The convergent point is where reality checking takes place. Answering the simple question, is it working? And then going on to say, how do we know? Where's the evidence? All those tough questions, but typically are very difficult to answer. But this is where the reality-driven leader operates. Looking now at how the reality-driven leader is developed, the process for that development is very similar to how we develop all employees. And at the heart of the process is the MindFit Map that I've already shown you. We then utilise the MindFit Map and we include what we call a whole brain approach. Whatever part of the brain is acting, it always has a knock-on effect the other part of the brain. The simple example is if you've got someone who's really happy, they'll be engaged, the adrenaline will be moving, and they'll probably be thinking in a better way than if they're angry, disillusioned, or miserable. So we start with the 4 elements of the brain, and we call it quite simply thinking, feeling, driven, and social. The thinking brain is being able to think flexibly and appropriately. The feeling brain is being emotionally competent and resilient. More than just emotional competence. This is about resilience and being mentally tough. The thinking brain is being driven with a real sense of purpose. And this, of course, is where beliefs, patterns, and optimism comes into that I've referred to earlier. And the social brain is how do we connect to others in a meaningful way so that everyone understands what's going on, why it's going on, and where they fit within the organisation. This is about inspiring and engaging, questioning, and being open-minded. Now, what organisation wouldn't want people like that? I wholly agree that it's every organisation that should be striving towards that end. But behavioural waste will be present across all parts of the brain. And by a self-assessment process, it can be reduced and, in many circumstances, it can be eliminated. That leads us to the last but equally important part of raising one's awareness. And like everything else that MindFit does, that's a simple process too. We call this the feedback loop, or if you like, the active performance improvement cycle. But our clients like it to refer to as the feedback loop. It's 3 words and much shorter. So this is the process we employ for improving awareness. And listed here are also what we call the 4 global strengths. And when employed together, performance will be improved. Those that get good at this really accelerate performance and achieve beyond expectations. So let's start with awareness. Many people are really not very aware of what's happening around them. And that's a considerable cause for high levels of behavioural waste. Equally, many people don't know how to focus or control their emotions, which also limit their ability to improve. If you've ever been really engaged and excited about something you were doing, you may not have noticed how focused and in control you are. But we help people answer the question, well, why isn't it always that way? Why am I sometimes like that and not others? And we help people find pathways to help them create that better habit and for it to happen more often. Remember what Aristotle said. Leadership is about habits. So we help people improve their feedback process. And as you'll see there, feedback is the breakfast of champions. Ken Blanchard in his Minute Manager quotes, and indeed quality and relevant feedback is absolutely necessary to raise our awareness. But can you give feedback in a non-emotional style that increases awareness and accelerates performance? Anyone should be able to give effective feedback, but that again seems to be a difficult arena for many, but not for MindFit people. So is our purpose your purpose? Is your purpose to develop a reality-driven leadership with can-do people who deliver value for the organisation? People that are engaged at work, high performers, and more productive and happier. Leaders that inspire, encourage, engage, and drive performance. It's a fun place to be. Employees and leaders that generate less behavioural waste in all forms, namely the personal, cultural, and systemic that we've talked about, and they create an atmosphere and a drive for continual performance. What about permanently replacing behavioural waste with growth behaviours, where innovation is encouraged and cherished? People that add value and new value and challenging the business with new opportunities. And lastly, create a can-do culture that's sustainable, making it a great place to work. So we've come to the end of my presentation for today. We've covered an awful lot of ground, but it just leaves me to say thank you for listening. I look forward to any questions you may have. But while you're thinking of those questions, I just with the next steps. Because as Lao Tzu said, those are important and it's your choice. What's the impact MindFit has on an organisation? The MindFit process results in leaders who know how to inspire, involve and engage their team. As a result, people grow and they develop into engaged employees that willingly perform. All they need to carry with them as a guide, whether leaders or team members, is not a head full of theories, not 20 or 30 leadership theories, but one map, 3 operating states, and 4 identities. And as promised at the beginning, as there's so much to take in here on this journey, and much of it is probably very new to you, we've written a book about some of our years of experience of behavioural waste. It includes everything I've mentioned in the presentation, plus a lot more. The link is on the screen, and that is our gift to you. So thank you for listening, and I'll now hand you back to Ali.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Neville Gaunt. Folks, we are now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions, you could either put it in the question box or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the webinar console, so if you click on it, you can directly talk with Mr. Neville Gaunt also. So let me go straight to the question box. First question, does MindFit's approach work in all sectors?
That's a really good question, and we get asked that far more often than you might believe. We have, over the last 15 years, trialled, tested, and rerun programs in absolutely every sector. You might think that this is just a business process. It's actually a people process, and we've developed great results, even with long-term unemployed people, homeless people, which you might not think are in a business context, but it's a whole sector that's out there. And certainly in businesses where there is a very clear focus on looking at outcomes, looking at results, changing behaviours actually directly relate to improving results. As Einstein said, and I'll paraphrase this, is doing the same thing and expecting different results. So we help people take that change and do something marginally different, but then they measure the result. So the simple answer to the question is yes, MindFit works everywhere. We haven't found anywhere that it doesn't work yet. We're still looking, but we haven't found it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. We have another one. What are your views about psychometric tools available in the market? Are they really effective to evaluate and assess such attitudes and behavioral patterns, considering their universal norms are perhaps not applicable as they claim to be?
Well, I think for many years people have referred to psychometrics as being either snake oil, as they call it, in other words, one suit fits all, or absolutely not working whatsoever. My background, I'm an accountant, and I believe in evidence. If psychometrics are used in context of developing people or recruiting people, then they can be a very useful tool. But if they're used as the one-stop shop, then actually there's going beyond what I believe psychometrics is capable of doing. We're very complicated people. We're not all the same, but there are patterns, and perhaps some of the questions have got predefined results. So we regularly get asked to include psychometrics in our programs, and DISC is a very common psychometric that people use. When I look at DISC, I have to think of what context I'm actually answering the question, because dependent on the context actually might give me a different answer. So in essence, what I would say is if they're used as part of a development process or an interview process, then I think they do have value. But if they're used as an expectation of a quick fix, then frankly, I think you need to look again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another one, the MindFit Map looks simple. Is that what makes your process easy for people to use?
That's a really good question, Ali. And people look at it, and when we say we use a map and there's only 3 directions of travel, the answer is people can understand simplicity and intuitively pick the map up. We can overlay lots and lots of complexity, and I can make it really complicated for people to either understand or take it on board. But the simple fact is we are very simple people and we're quite lazy. So if we can explain the map in a very simple way, which literally is a can't do, won't do, or can do attitude, which person wouldn't want to be a can do? And when they understand what the won't do and the can't do attitudes take them, and they do it habitually, they don't want to be there. So intuitively, people pick this up very, very quickly. I mean, we have students that 14 and 15 who take no longer than a couple of hours to understand the map in their world. Now, remember, most young people haven't got the experiences that of lots of business people. So in their own world, actually, they've got less to unblock and declutter, which in essence what this process is. But yes, it is simple. We designed it to be simple, but it can go incredibly deep depending on the individual. We don't know where the individual wants to go, so it's a little like coaching in that arena. Really good question. Thank you.
Okay, another one. Normally it is said in the Middle East, the more you move up the career ladder, by default keeping an egoistic and assertive attitude becomes necessary to manage large fleet of workforces. How would you advise to such people?
Well, we're back into beliefs and reality with this question, Ali. If you believe that to have a positional power is important to you getting your message over and for people to follow you, then that's your belief. We can demonstrate fairly quickly that that actually is not the best belief to have, because there are far better ways of engaging a workforce than, if you like, using a colloquial term, whipping them into shape. I've spent 30 years in the oil industry, many years, working in and around the Middle East, and the Middle East, in many respects, is no different from any other country that's going through an evolution. But what you will see is that organisations that go through an evolution of engagement and encouragement and leadership that encourages people to speak out, helps them to put their questions in a challenging but informative way, are by far the long-term winners in this arena. It is challenging, and whilst you look outside of your business window, the assumption will be that I'm only here because of my position. What that means is that you're actually being quite defensive, because you're not actually realizing the value that you can potentially be adding to that organization. It's an incredibly difficult arena to address, but if you believe that you can do something about it, then yes, our process will take you there, and it will take you there quite rapidly. People are actually quite surprised. We've had leaders that have left a session on day 2 and gone back to their office just to try something that they've suddenly learned, and they come back with big beaming smiles and elation of, it worked. I can't believe it worked. Well, they do believe it now because they've tried it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Another one, would you need all managers and leaders to be MindFit reality-driven leaders to make a difference?
Another really quite probing question. Thank you very much for the questioner. The answer to that is no, you don't. It's like having an organisation of 100 people and changing 10. Once those 10 people start to change their behaviour and their attitudes, the other 90 people actually will notice, and they'll be encouraged, just because we are people, to start to do the same. Some may be stubborn and not do it, in which case you might have to do a few more. But typically we say it's the 10% arena that you start to change, and let's see how that unfolds. And then potentially you might have to hit the more difficult to reach individuals that are more stubborn and non-believers, because they don't actually believe, or they're not aware of what's happening around them. But the simple fact is, it's about dropping a pebble in a lake. It's the ripple effect. And if you drop enough pebbles around an organisation, so if you have 100 people in an organisation and you take one from each division, those pebbles are dropped in each of those divisions. And that's when you actually see that this process actually gains momentum quite quickly. And remember, this is about developing engaged people. You know, Gallup's 13% is almost like a rigid number that we've become to be fixed upon. But all of the evidence says that if you have a hearts and minds engagement process, actually that engagement number can go up and does go up. The thing is, people think it's too difficult to do. That's why they don't do it. They will go and do lean management rather than behavioural management, because they believe lean works. But the thing is, 70 to 80% of lean development programs don't actually achieve the success that's expected. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. You have another one from Mr. Mohammed Al-Taib. The question is, can you please elaborate on KPIs used to evaluate the MindFit program?
Yeah, sure. Another good question. Fundamentally, KPIs, key performance indicators, if people don't know what it stands for, are a fact of life. The lower down the organisation, typically the more KPIs you have. The higher up the organisation, at board level, you can work within 5 or 6 KPIs that allegedly are an indicator of what the business is doing. So whatever the business indicators are that are currently there will actually be part of our input-output analysis, because what we do all the time is we look at performance. So if performance improves, one would have to imagine that if you've got a KPI that shows performance, we will see an increase in that KPI. But equally, there are other ways in which we measure the input and the output, and typically our flagship type programs last 3 months with a leadership development team, and we measure them on the way in. We do our own MindFit footprint. We may well, if they've got a psychometric that they like and they believe in, we're very happy to utilise those, because what we see is we see a change in behaviour. So we will see it on our own footprint, and we will see it on actually a psychometric behavioural pattern. But there are also other ways we can look at what the change is by whether people turn up to work early, whether they leave late, how much extra work they're getting through that may not be measured on a KPI. Are they happier generally? Are they a more engaged workforce where people are helping other people achieve? So your worst performer actually could become an incredibly good performer because of what people are doing around them. So there are many, if you like, metrics. Being an accountant, I do believe in the numbers. There are many metrics that can be used, but they're already in the organisation. Or we might find a new metric that all of a sudden they need to put in because actually it's quite important to the way the organisation works. Hope that explains a little bit about that, Mr. Mohammed.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one supplementary from Mr. Mohammed. Can you share some case studies on MindFit, if possible?
Absolutely, and that's part of because of the complexity of this arena and a short time to present it, because it's going to be new to many people. There are lots of examples in the Behavioral Waste book. That's still on the screen. If it's on my screen, I don't know whether it's still up there, but that link can be sent around to everybody. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, but that's a free link for all of our associates that are listening in currently. And it's written by Professor Victor Newman and the architect of MindFit, Graham Williams, with contributions from the team over the years. It's relatively short. We've tried to make it compact and identify the areas of behavioural waste which are personal, cultural and systemic, and the types of activity that people get up to. And we look at public sector and private sector. So we've got examples in the National Health Service, in the police force, and we've also got examples in real commercial entities. So yeah, there are lots of examples, but what I would say is please download the book. We don't bombard you with emails. You're not in a CRM system whereby you're constantly being asked question after question. All we ask for you is feedback. But remember, the first journey of an organisation is a personal journey of the individual. So a lot of the examples, and on the website you'll see individual testimonials, are from how it came to people that they realised they could change and what they did about that change. And once you've actually changed people into a can-do attitude and you've given them the tools to stay there, if they start to slip into the other area of the map, which we call behavioural waste, they will be aware that they're there. And if they don't have a tool, they will go and find another tool. And if they really struggling, they'll come back to us and they'll give us the example that they're really struggling with, and we'll point them in the right direction. But typically, once people have that can-do mindset, it's infectious. They don't lose it. You've only got to look at examples, and I know these are quite extreme examples, but to look at the MindFit process, sometimes you need to look at the extreme arena to see what the real impact is. This year we've had the Olympics in Rio and we've had the Paralympics, which is just about to close. You will see what ordinary people can achieve. Now, a lot of people think that, oh, you're born to be an athlete. Well, there may be some characteristics, but actually, if leaders aren't born, they're made, then if you look at Olympic athletes, and you've only got to look at the 100 metres, Usain Bolt is 6'5", and his nearest competitor is 5'11". So there are traits in the MindFit process that actually flow over into all types of activities. And that actually is a really good point, if you like, to make, is that if people change their behaviour and attitude at work from the work that Martin Seligman did in the 1960s and still doing today, there's more than enough proof now, evidence, that says if you change your behaviour in one arena, it will automatically change in another. Now that may be, a stretch to believe given this short presentation, and I don't want to go through the psychology because that's not the intent. Science is actually proving what we are developing and what we are creating on an ongoing basis. So back to the simple answer is lots of examples. Many are in the book. Several are on the website. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I can point out certain arenas. But it is about personal change first. I hope that helps.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Neville. Gaunt. That really brings us towards the end of the webinar. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss up?
Well, just to say thank you very much, Ali, for setting all this up. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what, in essence, is relatively new to lots of people because we operate mostly in Europe, UK, and sometimes in America. But it is something that people need to get to grips with, because behavioural waste will stop organisations growing. Behavioural waste, unfortunately, doesn't come from a conscious attitude. It actually mostly comes from habit, which is subconscious. And it's a little bit like learning to drive a car. Initially, it's a little clunky, but after a while, it becomes a habit. 20 years in, you don't even know you're driving. You could be thinking of something else. And that's how MindFit evolves. But of course, who's to say we've got good habits of driving or bad habits? We certainly know that we've got habits. But until we start to think about them, do we know whether they're good or bad? It really is as simple as that. It gets very complex, and we can take people through the complexity. But the simple thing is, if you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. And that's why I love the saying, and it's nearly 100 years old. So once again, thanks for everyone for listening. I hope this has been useful. I'm sure Ali will give you links to the presentation and certainly to the book that we've just launched. But thank you once again.
Well, I really want to thank you, Mr. Neville, on behalf of Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship. Mal, for your time and for this valuable information and for a free gift. Folks, I've already broadcasted the link on the chat console. If you look on the right side of your console at the bottom, I have shared the link. In fact, I have already downloaded my free copy, so I highly recommend that you guys should go ahead before it's a limited offer, before it's expired. So, but thank you very much, Neville, for a very lovely gift to our attendees. And hopefully we'll remain engaged and try to bring you again for another series of webinars, or perhaps in the kingdom one day. So thank you very much, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it. Please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn more about our upcoming programs and equally to access the recorded versions. With that note, I would like to end and conclude this session, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.